Hello, this is Carrie Filipetti from the Vandenberg Coalition and a distinguished fellow at the Wilson Center. It has certainly been a busy week for those interested in Venezuela and American national security. About a week ago, I highlighted the military achievement of Operation Absolute Resolve and its implications both for the American military and America's role abroad. At the time, I left open the question of what happens next in Venezuela. Now, almost a week after the operation, Venezuela and the United States are starting to react. The Maduro regime, now doing business as Delcy Rodriguez, has issued a series of both conciliatory and antagonistic statements, sharing different messages based on her audience. On the one hand, it was announced that she'll provide 30 to 50 million barrels of oil to the United States, something that President Trump has clearly prioritized. And the regime also released 11 political prisoners. A meager amount, given the almost 1,000 currently imprisoned, but part of their typical efforts to lower international pressure. Now, many more, of course, need to be unconditionally released, but it's always good to see Venezuelans return home. At the same time, she has increased repression by implementing a decree signed by Maduro that both authorizes the search and arrest of those Venezuelans who supported America's action and allows the placement of personnel in key sectors under temporary military authority, including the oil industry. For its part, President Trump's administration has begun to lay out what they see as the path forward, with Secretary Rubio identifying three phases of the strategy: stabilization, recovery, and transition. All of them with an eye towards achieving four central conditions for U.S. national security: an end to narcotics trafficking, an end to weaponized immigration, an end to Russia, China, and Iran's role in Venezuela, and safe access for American businesses. Now, there isn't much clarity on what transition means, but here's what we can glean. While people draw comparisons to Iraq, which is a normal reaction given the rhetoric about oil, the real comparison here is Panama, another country in the Western Hemisphere whose dictator was taken into U.S. custody. This is a much more optimistic scenario and stands out as a moment where the U.S.'s so-called regime change efforts were successful. The reason they were successful, of course, is because of that ultimate turn towards democracy. In Panama, however, there were 27,000 American troops on the ground providing security for that transition, enabling the democratically elected leader to come to power right away, even though elections would take another 4 years. In Venezuela, we don't have those boots on the ground, nor would most Americans support them. So, how do we ensure security? It's here that I think President Trump sees the first stage, that stabilization stage. In the short term, his administration seems to have made the calculus that some continuity with the regime is necessary to ensure Venezuela doesn't descend into chaos. That's a reasonable concept, and it echoes some of the first Trump administration's efforts on democratic transition, which at the time urged a sort of power sharing arrangement. While we don't want to make any concessions, some are likely necessary in the immediate term to ensure a stable transition. That said, while short term stability may indeed be necessary for free and fair elections are necessary for long term stability. If the administration continues down this path, securing stability over the short term with some minor partnerships with the remaining elements of the Maduro regime, they will then turn to recovery, including economic, for Venezuela, and finally transition. And it's respect to transition that this policy can be made or broken. Maria Corina Machado and President-elect Edmundo Gonzalez have already stated their willingness to participate in another election, but of course that election will need to be free and fair. As it stands, Delcy Rodriguez and the rest of the remaining Maduro regime are not incentivized to do that without pressure from the United States. And it's here that America's goals of U.S. security and the Venezuelan people's goals of democratic governance perfectly align. In order to provide the kind of rule of law and security guarantees necessary to protect large-scale American investments from the Chavista expropriation that Trump is so focused on, Venezuela needs to return to democracy and the kind of privatization that Maria Corina Machado emphasizes in her Freedom Manifesto. The same is true for America's emphasis on ending illegal immigration. People will only continue to flee and certainly will not return under the current regime simply because its figurehead now wears a nearly $1,000 dress instead of a Nike tracksuit. Just as in Panama, long-term stability for the U.S. depends on democracy for them. Given the United States now holds significant power over the regime, we should add democratic reforms to our list of demands, including releasing all political prisoners without preconditions, canceling various repressive decrees, ensuring the safe return of Venezuelan opposition members in exile, and reforming the Supreme Court and National Electoral Council to start. It'll be a long process, but a critical one. So, if a transition means what I hope it means and what Secretary Rubio's legacy suggests it means, an as yet unannounced long term pivot to Democratic actors, that would be a really compelling way to secure American national security interests, to say nothing of Venezuela's vibrant future. But if we trade long term stability for short term wins and don't force that pivot to Democratic actors, we will have taken out one dictator and probably just replaced him with another.